So, does anybody have any gray cells left? I'm totally blitzed, and so I'm gonna try and keep it extremely simple, though I'm not sure whether I will make it all as short as people want. So I'm going to begin by telling you a few stories. By the way, my choice book is mostly a description of data that Sheena collected, and that's sort of what I've done in my dotage. I write about other people's work, and I'm going to talk to you about other people's work today. So let me tell you 3 stories. Here's story number 1. 3-year-old kids get a chance to play with wonderful magic markers. They go into a special office, they draw a picture, and they get a Good Player Award. Other 3-year-old kids don't have this opportunity. A few weeks later, these markers are reintroduced to the nursery school classroom, and the question is who uses them and what kind of pictures do they draw. The result is that if they got a Good Player Award 2 weeks before, A, they are less likely to draw, and B, if they do, they draw worse pictures. That's story number 1. Story number 2. Israeli daycare centers having a problem. Parents are coming late to pick up their kids, and as much as the teachers would like to just lock the door and leave the kids on the doorstep, they think that's an unseemly thing to do. So a clever, no doubt trained in economics, administrator decides to fine the parents for coming late. What happens? Lateness goes up. This lasts for several months. They take the fines away. Lateness stays up. A fine is not a price, you scream, tearing your hair out of your head. Well, who said a fine is not a price? Example number 3, Switzerland is trying to decide where to site nuclear waste dumps. The public is extremely well informed. There's going to be a national referendum. They go around, some psychologists go around house to house and ask the question, would you be willing to have a nuclear waste dump in your neighborhood? Astonishingly, 50% of the respondents say yes. So you probe. Is it dangerous? Yeah. Will it decrease your property value? Yeah. So how come? Well, it's got to go somewhere. There's no reason why it shouldn't go here. They knock on other doors and they ask a slightly different question. They ask, if we paid you 6 weeks' pay every year, would you be willing to have a nuclear waste dump in your neighborhood? Instead of 50% of people saying yes, 25% of people say yes. What all of these 3 stories have in common is that people have a reason to do something. Drawing is fun. I have social responsibilities to pick my kid up on time. I have citizen responsibilities to my state. We give them a second reason to do the very same thing, an award, a fine, or a payoff, a bribe. And lo and behold, when you give people 2 reasons to do something, they are less likely to do it than when they have only 1. We can summarize these 3 stories, there are others, as examples of motivational competition. 2 reasons are not always better than 1. Sometimes, if motives tap into different psychological systems, they can antagonize one another instead of complementing one another, and one of them may win. And the one that wins may be weaker than the one it beats, which is why when there's money available for having a nuclear waste dump in your neighborhood, you're less likely to say yes than when not. The way to think about this is that without the offer of money, the Swiss citizens only have one question to ask, and that is, what are my responsibilities as a citizen? When you do offer money, they now have 2 questions to ask. Question 1, should I think about this in terms of my public responsibilities or in terms of my self-interest? Well, you've answered that question for me by offering me money. So now it's just about self-interest. And now the question is, how much money is enough money to justify, in my own interest, having a nuclear waste dump in my neighborhood? The answer is there's no amount of money that's enough money to justify my having a nuclear waste dump in my neighborhood. So these 3 examples are examples of what I have come to refer to as idea technology. We are used to thinking about technology that comes out of the natural sciences as a technology of objects. Natural scientists make things. The things they make do things. They do things that we want them to do. They may sometimes do things that we don't want them to do, and we worry about, in that case, about whether the good is worth the bad. Social sciences, by and large, don't make things. They make ideas. And the ideas themselves also do things. They change the way people understand the world they live in. They change the way people understand themselves. They change the way people understand other people, and so they change the way people act. If you understand your poverty as an act of God, then you pray. If you understand it as a consequence of your own inadequacy, then you skulk around in depressed resignation. If you understand it as the result of the imposition of power, then you rise up in revolt. And whether you respond to poverty with resignation or revolution depends on how you understand it. And social science provides the technology, the idea technology, with which people understand the world they live in. This is an extremely potent kind of technology. In some ways, it's more potent than thing technology for two reasons. First, ideas are much less obtrusive than things, and so they can worm their way into our lives and have effects on us before we even realize that they're present. And second, perhaps more importantly, ideas can have these effects even if they are false. They don't have to be true. They simply have to be believed. And thanks to Marx, I call false idea technology, or idea technology that is made up of false ideas, ideology. This is a different use of ideology than the one that's been used up until now, but for me, ideology is specifically false idea technology. So several years ago, I was trained as a Skinnerian, which is a shock even to me. And several years ago, with some colleagues, I wrote a paper about Skinner, you know, Skinner the behaviorist. It's all about rewards. Study pigeons and rats in boxes and find out all you need to know about people. And typically, the criticisms of Skinner were about how it was incomplete or inadequate. Didn't capture everything we needed to know. We had a slightly different take. Our argument was that Skinner came into his intellectual maturity in the 1930s, looking at a world that was completely dominated by factory wages, factory labor. That was a world in which everything that everybody did, they did for the wage. This was not an accident. Thanks to the ingenious technical tweaking by Frederick Winslow Taylor at the turn of the century, something known as the scientific management movement, factory work was organized so as to guarantee that there was no reason for anyone on the shop floor to do anything except for the wage. Work was divided into meaningless, easily repeated bits, so that why else would you show up except to get paid? And the virtue of this is that it enabled the manager to control the behavior of the worker with exquisite precision by manipulating the schedule and rate of pay. And so the world Skinner described was a world that had been created with the transformation of work into a factory wage system. So we made this argument, and you can recognize that it was an anomalous or even bizarre way to organize work because there were alternative ways that people organized their activities that were different from the factory. But the point we made is that if Skinnerian techniques got applied in schools, in mental hospitals, in prisons, so that before you knew it, it was the only way in which people related to their work, it would be hard for anyone to notice that there was anything at all unusual about this. And people would conclude, indeed, that Skinner was right. He was simply describing the world as it was, as opposed to describing the world as we had made it, because all of the world had been made in the image that Skinner had developed. And if you think I'm exaggerating, there's a guy at Harvard, I gather, in economics who is trying to do exactly this in the schools of New York and everywhere else right now, bribing kids to show up for class and to get good grades on tests.